The summons. The crystalline halls of the Galactic Council chamber hummed with tension as delegates from across 17 star systems gathered for what many called the trial of the millennium. Ambassador Zero of the Korthan Empire adjusted his ceremonial robes, his 3 eyes fixed on the empty defendant's platform at the chamber's center. "This is unprecedented," whispered Counselor Mayara, her feathered crest fluttering with anxiety. "A human standing trial before the council? And not just any human, but one of their cursed kind." Zero's mandibles clicked in agreement. In the 300 cycles since humanity had joined the galactic community, they had proven themselves to be brilliant, adaptable, and dangerously unpredictable. But this case went beyond anything the council had encountered. The accused was named Demon Corvus. The name itself had become legend across the outer territories. Some called him savior. Others called him monster. The council called him a threat to the established order of galactic civilization. The chamber's main doors irised open with a resonant hum. Every delegate turned to watch as 2 sentinel guards, their armor gleaming under the bioluminescent ceiling, escorted a figure in dark clothing into the room. Demon Corvus moved with an unsettling grace that made even the most battle-hardened warriors shift uncomfortably. He appeared human at first glance, tall and lean with sharp features and jet-black hair that fell past his shoulders. But his eyes told a different story. They were pools of deep crimson that seemed to absorb the light around them, ancient and knowing in a way that defied his apparent youth. He wore no restraints. The council had learned quickly that conventional bindings were meaningless against him. As Demon stepped onto the platform, Supreme Arbiter Kelnara raised her translucent wings, calling the assembly to order. The Sylphid leader's voice carried across the chamber with crystalline clarity. "Demon Corvus of Earth, you stand before the Galactic Council to answer for actions that have shaken the foundations of interstellar law. 7 colonies liberated without authorization. 14 diplomatic agreements nullified through direct intervention. 3 sovereign governments overthrown. And most troubling of all, the conversion of 17,000 sapient beings into what you call your kindred." Demon's expression remained neutral, but a slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I stand here voluntarily, Arbiter. I could have chosen otherwise." A wave of angry chittering and electronic protests rippled through the assembly. The arrogance of this creature was astounding. Kelnara's wings shimmered with irritation. "Your cooperation is noted, if only because it reveals your contempt for this body. We shall begin with the charges. Counselor Zero, present the evidence." Zero approached the central holographic display, and images began to materialize in the air above the assembly. The first showed a mining colony on Tertius 4, where workers of the insectoid Vrel species had been enslaved by their own government for generations. 3 standard years ago, Demon Corvus arrived at this facility alone, Zero explained. Within 48 hours, the entire security force had been neutralized, the facility administrators had fled, and 5,000 Vrel workers declared their freedom. The legal government of Tertius 4 filed formal complaints with this council. "A government that profited from slavery," Demon interjected calmly. "Your laws may have permitted it through convenient loopholes, but that didn't make it right. You do not decide what is right for sovereign systems," Kelnara snapped. "Continue, Counselor." The images shifted to show more locations. A research station where political prisoners were subjected to neural experimentation. A corporate mining operation where workers were paid in company script that kept them in perpetual debt. A military dictatorship that harvested organs from its own citizens. In each case, Demon Corvus had appeared like a shadow in the night. And in each case, the oppressors had vanished or surrendered, while the oppressed found themselves suddenly, impossibly free. "And this is where the situation becomes truly alarming," Zero continued. His voice dropped lower. "The accused does not merely liberate these beings. He offers them a choice. Join him. Become like him. Transform into something that defies our understanding of biology and physics." A new image appeared, this one showing a young Vrel female. Her chitinous exoskeleton had taken on an obsidian sheen, and her compound eyes glowed with the same crimson light that burned in Demon's gaze. 16,973 beings have accepted his offer, Zero said. They call themselves the Nocturne Collective. They possess strength far beyond their original species. They do not age. They heal from injuries that would kill any normal being. They require blood to sustain themselves, though they claim to take it only from willing donors or synthesized sources. And most disturbing of all, they are absolutely loyal to Demon Corvus. "That's not entirely accurate," Demon said, his voice carrying easily across the silent chamber. "They're loyal to the principles we share. freedom, protection of the innocent, justice for the forgotten. I don't command them. I inspire them. Counselor Mayara stood, her feathers bristling. You have created an army that answers to no government, respects no boundaries, and operates outside all established law. How is this not a threat to every peaceful civilization in the galaxy? Demon turned his crimson gaze directly on her. Because your peaceful civilizations were built on the suffering of those too weak to resist. I've read your histories. Every species in this chamber achieved their position through conquest, exploitation, or convenient blindness to injustice. You created laws that protect the powerful and pacify the desperate. Someone needed to offer an alternative. The chamber erupted in outrage. Delegates shouted in a dozen languages, their translation implants struggling to keep pace with the chaos. Kelnara had to pulse her wings 3 times before order was restored. Your ideology is irrelevant, the arbiter declared. Your actions violate 17 interstellar treaties and the fundamental principle of non-interference. You have destabilized entire sectors of space. Trade routes have been disrupted. Governments live in fear of your intervention. The chaos you have created threatens the very fabric of galactic society. Demon was quiet for a long moment, his ancient eyes studying each delegate in turn. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but carried an edge sharp enough to cut through steel. I was human once. Fully human. I walked on Earth over 600 years ago, in a time when my people were just beginning to reach for the stars. I was a soldier then, fighting in wars over resources and territory and pride. I saw so much death, so much suffering, and I was powerless to stop it. He paused and something flickered in his expression. Pain, perhaps, or regret. Then I was changed, made into what I am now. I won't bore you with the details of vampiric transformation, how the old legends got some things right and others laughably wrong. What matters is that I gained power. Real power. The kind that lets you stand against tyrants and win. Demon's hands clenched at his sides. I spent centuries wandering Earth trying to find my place. I fed on criminals and warlords, told myself I was doing good. But I was just one being in one world. The suffering continued. Then humanity reached the stars and I saw the suffering was universal. Every species has its predators and prey. Its masters and slaves. It's forgotten and forsaken. He looked directly at Kelnara. So yes, I intervened. I broke your laws. I upset your comfortable order. Because your order was built on accepting that some beings deserve to suffer for the convenience of others. And I reject that absolutely. The arbiter's wings had gone very still. Noble words from someone who creates more beings like himself. Who spreads his curse across the galaxy like a plague. It's not a curse, Demon said quietly. It's a choice. Every single being who joined the Nocturne Collective was given a full explanation of what they would become. The strengths, the limitations, the need for blood, the sensitivity to certain wavelengths of light, the transformation of their very biology. And they chose it because the alternative, continuing to live as victims in your perfect galactic order, was worse than any curse I could offer. Zero stepped forward again. You speak of choice, but 17,000 beings now depend on blood to survive. You have made them predators. We don't hunt, Demon corrected. We don't kill for sustenance. Every member of the collective follows strict protocols. Synthetic blood from laboratory cultures. Voluntary donations from willing participants who are compensated fairly. Blood extracted from captured criminals who would otherwise be executed. We have never, not once, taken an innocent life for food. Never? Counselor Mayara challenged. Can you truly claim that with certainty? You have 17,000 followers scattered across dozens of worlds. Demon's eyes flashed dangerously. I would know. Every member of the collective shares a connection through me. If even one of them broke our codes, I would feel it immediately. And I would end them myself before they could harm another innocent being. The casual way he spoke of ending his own followers sent a chill through the assembly. This was not a leader who tolerated betrayal of his principles. Kelnara spread her wings wide. This council will now deliberate on the charges. Demon Corvus, you will be confined to a holding chamber while we reach our verdict. I'd rather not, Demon said pleasantly. But I'll wait here if it makes you feel better. The arbiter's expression hardened. This is not a request. Nor is it an order I intend to follow. Demon's voice remained calm, almost friendly. I came here to explain myself, not to submit to your judgment. If you wish to debate my actions, I'm happy to continue. But I won't be imprisoned, not even temporarily. 24 sentinel guards materialized from hidden positions around the chamber, their weapons trained on the platform. Demon didn't even glance at them. "You may want to reconsider that order, Arbiter," he said softly. "Your guards are brave and well-trained. But they're also mortal. And while I've avoided killing in my interventions, I will defend myself if attacked. I'd prefer not to demonstrate why that would be a mistake." The tension in the chamber reached a breaking point. Delegates were backing away from the platform. The sentinels held their positions but looked uncertain. Everyone had heard the stories of what Demon Corvus could do when threatened. Supreme Arbiter Kelnara stared at the vampire for a long moment, weighing her options. Finally, she lowered her wings in a gesture of reluctant acceptance. "Very well. The guards will stand down. But know this, Demon Corvus, your defiance here proves the Council's concerns. You respect no authority but your own. That makes you dangerous, regardless of your stated intentions." Demon inclined his head slightly. "I respect authority that earns it through justice and wisdom. Your council has demonstrated neither in the cases I've intervened in. Perhaps that's something to reflect on while you deliberate." As the primary delegates withdrew to their chambers, the assembly hall buzzed with anxious conversation. In the observation galleries, representatives from hundreds of species watched the proceedings with fascination and fear. Among them, a young human diplomat named Sarah Nakamura leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Demon's solitary figure standing calmly on the platform. She had studied every report about him, read every testimony. She had also seen the classified files her government tried to keep hidden, files that detailed humanity's knowledge of vampires and their long, secret history on Earth. What the Council didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that Demon Corvus wasn't just powerful. He was patient. He had waited centuries to reveal himself, had studied galactic civilization for decades before making his first move. He had come to this trial knowing exactly how it would unfold. And Sarah suspected that the Council's judgment, whatever it might be, was exactly what Demon wanted them to deliver. The witnesses. The Council reconvened 3 hours later, but rather than delivering a verdict, Supreme Arbiter Kelnara announced that they would hear testimony from those affected by Demon's interventions. Witnesses would be called from both sides, accusers and defenders. Demon remained on the platform, having not moved from his position. He showed no signs of fatigue or impatience, standing with the stillness of a statue carved from shadow. The first witness was a Corthan administrator named Velmoth, his silvered carapace bearing the insignia of a planetary governor. He approached the testimony sphere with obvious nervousness, his multiple legs clicking against the chamber floor. "Governor Velmoth," Kelnara began, "you filed one of the original complaints against the accused. Please describe your encounter with Demon Corvus." Velmoth's mandibles trembled as he spoke. "He came to our mining colony on Tertius 4 3 years ago. Our operation was completely legal, sanctioned by both planetary and council law. We employed 5,000 Vrel workers under standard indenture contracts." "Slave contracts," Demon interjected quietly. "Legally binding labor agreements," Velmoth insisted, his voice rising. "The Vrel signed willingly. They received food, shelter and medical care in exchange for their work. It's a system that has functioned for generations." Demon's crimson eyes fixed on the governor. "Tell them about the contract terms. How long was the standard indenture period?" Velmoth hesitated. 20 standard years. "And how were the workers paid?" "In facility credits, redeemable at company stores for necessities." "And if a worker wanted to leave before their contract expired?" The governor's carapace darkened. "They would forfeit all accumulated credits and be subject to legal penalties for breach of contract, including potential imprisonment or extended indenture to cover the employer's losses." "A prison by any other name," Demon said softly. "Tell them what the Vrel's debts typically totaled by the end of their first year." Velmoth's multiple eyes flickered. Many workers found themselves owing more than they earned due to the cost of their housing, food and mandatory equipment fees. But this is standard practice across multiple industries and species. The Council itself has conveniently legislated exploitation into existence, Demon finished. "I didn't come to debate economics with you, Governor. I came to free people who couldn't free themselves. You and your administrators were given a choice: leave peacefully or face the consequences. You chose wisely and left. No one died. But my entire operation was destroyed," Velmoth protested. "Decades of investment, gone. The facility was dismantled, the equipment distributed to the workers. I was ruined financially." Demon's expression held no sympathy. "You'll forgive me if I don't mourn the loss of your slave empire." Kelnara intervened before the exchange could escalate. "The Council notes the testimony. Governor Velmoth, you may step down. The next several witnesses followed a similar pattern. Corporate executives who had lost profitable operations. Military officers whose authority had been undermined. Government officials who had watched their carefully maintained systems of control crumble overnight. Each one described Demon's interventions as catastrophic disruptions. Each one detailed the economic and political chaos that followed. And each one was calmly contradicted by Demon, who highlighted the exploitation, abuse, or outright cruelty that had necessitated his involvement. Then the tone of the testimony shifted. A young Vrel female approached the sphere, her obsidian exoskeleton gleaming in the chamber's light. Her compound eyes bore that distinctive crimson glow. This was Kasara, one of the first beings Demon had transformed. Witness Kasara, Kelnara said carefully, you are one of the accused, converts. Can you describe your experience? Kasara's voice was strong, musical in a way that Vrel voices rarely were. The transformation had changed more than just her physical capabilities. I was born into indenture, she began. My mother signed a contract before I hatched and her debt became mine. I spent 19 years in that facility working 16-hour shifts in the deep mines, breathing recycled air thick with chemical dust. I watched friends die from equipment failures and cave-ins. I watched others simply give up, their spirits broken by the endless cycle of work and debt. Her gaze swept across the assembly. Then Demon came. He appeared in our barracks one night like a shadow given form. He didn't demand anything. He simply asked if we wanted to be free. And you believed him? Counselor Mayara asked skeptically. No, Kasara admitted. We thought it was a trap or a cruel joke. Freedom wasn't real for beings like us. But he proved it. He walked into the administration center alone and came out 3 hours later with every indenture contract dissolved and every credit account seized as restitution. The administrators fled. We were actually free. She paused and something like wonder crossed her alien features. Then he offered us something more. A way to ensure we could never be enslaved again. He explained what he was, what we would become. The power but also the responsibility. The need for blood but also the means to obtain it ethically. And he made it absolutely clear. This was a choice, not a demand. Why did you accept? Kelnara asked. Kasara's crimson eyes blazed with intensity. Because I had spent my entire life as prey. Weak, helpless, at the mercy of those stronger than me. Demon offered me the chance to become something that could protect not just myself but others like me. How could I refuse? And you feel no regret? No longing for your original form? Every day I wake with strength I never imagined possible, Kasara said firmly. I no longer tire. I no longer fear injury or illness. And yes, I need blood to survive, but I obtain it from laboratory sources or willing donors who are paid fairly. I gave up one kind of dependence for another, but this one doesn't require me to sacrifice my dignity or freedom. She turned to face Demon directly. He gave me back my life. More than that, he gave me the power to help others reclaim theirs. There are 17,000 of us now, across dozens of worlds. And every single one of us chose this path willingly, with full knowledge of what it meant. More of the Nocturne Collective testified. A human male named Torres, a former corporate security officer who had grown disgusted with the crimes he was ordered to ignore. A Sylphid scientist named Priel who had been imprisoned for publishing research that contradicted her government's propaganda. A Corthan soldier named Jax who had refused orders to fire on civilian protesters. Each one told a similar story. They had been trapped, powerless, or complicit in systems they couldn't change. Demon had offered them a way out and the means to make a difference. And each one spoke of the strict codes they followed. Never feed without consent, never transform others without extensive counseling and waiting periods, never use their powers for personal gain. But the most powerful testimony came from those who had been helped but had not joined the collective. An elderly Vrel named Thorn shuffled to the testimony sphere, his natural brown carapace worn and scarred from a lifetime of labor. He had been freed from Tertius IV but had declined transformation. Why didn't you accept Demon's offer? Zero asked. Thorn's voice was gravelly but firm. I am old. My life is nearly complete. Demon explained that his gift is forever, and I have no desire to be young again. I wanted to spend my remaining years free, nothing more. And did he respect that decision? He honored it absolutely, Thorn said. More than that, he helped us establish a new settlement on an unclaimed world. Provided resources, training, connections to fair trading partners. He asks nothing in return except that we treat each other with dignity and justice. Many of us chose not to transform, and we are no less valued by those who did. The old Vrel turned toward Demon. That being saved my people. He gave us back our lives and our future. If your council punishes him for that, then your laws are broken, not his actions. The chamber fell silent as Thorn shuffled back to his seat. Even the most hostile delegates seemed moved by the simple conviction in his words. Kelnara called for a recess and Sarah Nakamura seized the opportunity. She made her way down from the observation gallery, using her diplomatic credentials to access the chamber floor. She needed to speak with Demon. The guards initially blocked her approach, but Demon gestured for them to allow her through. As she stepped onto the platform, she felt the temperature drop several degrees. The vampire's presence was like standing near an open window in deep winter. Diplomat Nakamura, Demon said, his crimson eyes studying her with interest. I wondered when someone from Earth would make an appearance. You know who I am? A slight smile. I know everyone in this chamber. Their histories, their motivations, their secrets. It's one of the advantages of my condition. Enhanced memory to go with enhanced senses. Sarah glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard. Why did you really come here? You must have known the council would see you as a threat. Of course I knew, Demon said. That's precisely why I came. I don't understand. Demon's expression grew serious. This council maintains order through carefully balanced systems of power. They broker compromises between stronger and weaker species, always ensuring that the strong remain strong and the weak remain manageable. They've created a civilization where injustice is legislated into existence and suffering is categorized as acceptable losses. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I could have continued operating in the shadows, liberating one colony at a time. But that would take centuries and the council would adapt, would create new systems to replace the old. I needed to force a crisis. Make them confront what they've built and what they've been ignoring. By putting yourself on trial? By showing them that their power is limited, Demon corrected. That there are forces in this galaxy they can't control or contain. That their authority exists only because beings accept it, and that acceptance can be withdrawn. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the vampire's presence. You're trying to undermine the entire galactic order. I'm trying to prove it's already undermined, Demon said. The council rules through consensus and threat of force. But what happens when someone appears who can't be threatened? Who can stand in their chamber and refuse their authority with impunity? It forces everyone to ask, if their laws can't bind him, what else are their laws failing to address? He straightened, his crimson gaze sweeping across the empty assembly hall. This trial isn't about judging me. It's about forcing the council to judge itself. And regardless of their verdict, the cracks in their foundation are now visible for all to see. Before Sarah could respond, the chime sounded for the session to resume. She quickly returned to her seat, her mind racing with the implications of Demon's words. As the delegates filed back in, she noticed something she hadn't before. Many of them were watching Demon with not just fear or hostility but something else. Uncertainty. Doubt. The testimonies had revealed truths that couldn't be easily dismissed. The vampire had already won something here, even if the council condemned him. Kelnara called for final statements before deliberation. Counselor Zero rose to make the case for conviction. This council exists to maintain peace and order across thousands of worlds, he declared. We balance the needs and rights of countless species. Are we perfect? No. But we provide stability, predictability, and a framework for resolving disputes without violence. Demon Corvus threatens all of that. He pointed at the platform. He claims to act in the name of justice, but he recognizes no authority but his own. He claims to liberate the oppressed, but he creates beings dependent on blood and loyal to his ideology. He claims to avoid killing, but he admits he would execute his own followers if they broke his codes. This is not justice. This is tyranny wearing a benevolent mask. Zero's 3 eyes blazed with conviction. If we allow this being to operate without consequence, we send a message to every vigilante, every revolutionary, every being who believes their personal morality supersedes established law. The chaos that would follow would dwarf anything Demon has caused. For the sake of galactic civilization, he must be stopped. Applause and signs of agreement rippled through many delegates, but not all. Some remained silent, thoughtful. Then it was time for Demon to make his final statement. He stepped to the center of the platform and the chamber fell completely silent. I am 637 years old, he began. I have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of ideologies, the endless cycle of oppression and revolution. I have seen slavery abolished and then reinstated under new names. I have watched the powerful promise justice and then redefine it to maintain their power. His voice carried to every corner of the vast chamber. When I was human, truly human, I believed that law and order were the foundations of civilization. I fought to preserve them. I watched good people die defending systems that, in the end, only protected those who needed protection least. Demon's crimson eyes seemed to glow brighter. Then I became something else. Something the laws couldn't anticipate or contain. And I realized that all law is ultimately arbitrary. It exists because beings agree it exists. It has power because beings grant it power. And when law becomes a tool of oppression rather than justice, it loses all moral authority. He paused, letting his words sink in. You say I threaten galactic civilization. I say your civilization was already broken, already failing the billions of beings who suffer under your carefully maintained order. You say I recognize no authority but my own. I say I recognize the only authority that matters, the fundamental right of all sentient beings to live free from oppression. Demon's hands spread wide. So yes, I broke your laws. I will continue to break them wherever they enable suffering. I will continue to offer beings a choice you deny them, the power to protect themselves and others. And I will continue to stand against tyranny in all its forms, whether it wears the crown of a dictator or the robes of a council. His voice dropped to something almost gentle. Condemn me if you must. Declare me an enemy of galactic civilization. It won't change what I am or what I do. But perhaps, in your deliberations, you might ask yourselves why so many beings chose to follow someone you call a monster rather than remain in the civilization you call just. The chamber remained silent as Demon finished. No applause, no protests, just a heavy, contemplative quiet that spoke volumes. Supreme Arbiter Kelnara rose slowly, her wings trembling slightly. The council will now deliberate in private. A verdict will be announced within 24 standard hours. As the delegates filed out, Sarah watched Demon return to his solitary vigil on the platform. He showed no concern about the outcome, no anxiety about his fate. He simply waited, patient as stone, ancient as stars. And somewhere in that waiting, Sarah understood that Demon Corvus had already achieved exactly what he came for. The verdict. The chamber filled slowly as the 24-hour period elapsed. Delegates moved to their positions with uncharacteristic solemnity. The usual political chatter was absent. Something had shifted during the deliberations, a tension that went beyond the simple matter of judging one being's actions. Demon stood on the platform as he had throughout the proceedings, unchanged and unmoved. But Sarah noticed something different in the way the guards positioned themselves now. They maintained their posts but they no longer aimed their weapons directly at him. A subtle shift, but significant. Supreme Arbiter Kelnara entered last, her crystalline wings dimmed to a somber gray. She moved to her position slowly as if carrying a great weight. This council has deliberated extensively, she began, her voice lacking its usual commanding resonance. We have reviewed all evidence, heard all testimony, and examined the precedents available to us. What we discovered is that there are no adequate precedents for this case. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Kelnara raised a wing for silence. Demon Corvus, you have been charged with 17 distinct violations of interstellar law. By the letter of our codes, you are guilty of every single charge. Your actions disrupted sovereign governments, violated non-interference treaties, and created a new form of life without authorization from the Biological Ethics Committee. Demon inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the charges without disputing them. However, Kelnara continued, and the word hung in the air like a blade suspended by a thread, this council was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth during our deliberations. In every case where you intervened, in every system where you broke our laws, the governments involved were themselves operating in ways that violated the spirit of those same laws. Counselor Zero stood abruptly. Arbiter, we agreed? Sit down, Counselor, Kelnara said sharply. The verdict is already decided. Zero slowly lowered himself back into his seat, his mandibles clicking with barely suppressed anger. Kelnara turned back to Demon. The council is divided. 13 members voted to condemn you, to declare you an enemy of galactic civilization and authorize force to contain or eliminate you. 12 members voted to acknowledge that while your methods are problematic, your interventions addressed genuine injustices that this council has failed to adequately address. She paused, and her wings flickered with something that might have been shame. I cast the deciding vote. And I voted to abstain. Shock rippled through the chamber. An abstention from the Supreme Arbiter was virtually unprecedented. This is not a verdict of innocent or guilty, Kelnara declared. This is an acknowledgement that the council itself is on trial here as much as you are. You have exposed the contradictions in our laws, the loopholes that permit exploitation, the comfortable blindness we maintain towards suffering that doesn't directly threaten stability. She stood taller, her wings spreading wide. Therefore this council issues the following decree: Demon Corvus, you will not be condemned or declared an enemy. However, you will also not be sanctioned or approved. You exist in a space beyond our authority, and we acknowledge we lack the means to effectively govern beings of your capability. This is madness, Zero hissed, but he didn't stand again. This is reality, Kelnara countered. But there are conditions, Demon Corvus. You claim to act in the name of justice. Very well. This council will establish a new committee to review the very laws you have broken, to examine whether they truly serve justice or merely preserve power. You will cooperate with this committee, providing information about the situations you have intervened in. Demon's expression shifted slightly. Interest sparked in his crimson eyes. And if your committee determines the laws should remain unchanged? Then we will at least have honestly examined our foundations, Kelnara said. But I suspect we both know what such an examination will reveal. She looked across the assembly. Furthermore, this council acknowledges the existence of the Nocturne Collective as a semi-autonomous organization. They will not be persecuted for their nature, provided they adhere to the codes Demon has described. No forced conversion, no hunting of innocents, no feeding without consent. They will be monitored, but they will also be recognized. Counselor Mayara's feathers bristled with agitation. You're legitimizing them? Making them part of our civilization? They already are part of our civilization, Kelnara said quietly. 17,000 beings across dozens of worlds. Pretending otherwise serves no one. Better to establish clear guidelines and maintain dialogue than to drive them further into the shadows. She turned back to Demon. In exchange, you will cease your unilateral interventions. If you discover injustice, you will bring it to the Council's attention through proper channels. Give us the opportunity to address these issues through reform rather than revolution. Demon was silent for a long moment. Every being in the chamber waited to hear whether he would accept. And if the Council fails to act, he finally asked. If proper channels lead nowhere, if reform is blocked by those who benefit from injustice? What then? Kelnara met his gaze without flinching. Then you will have demonstrated that our system is beyond saving, and we will have forfeited any moral authority to govern. I pray it does not come to that. So do I, Arbiter, Demon said softly. So do I. He stepped forward to the edge of the platform. I accept your terms with one addition. Any being who wishes to join the Nocturne Collective must first spend 6 months in counseling and education about what transformation means. No exceptions. And any member who breaks our codes will face justice not from your council, but from me directly. We police our own. Agreed, Kelnara said. This council will establish diplomatic relations with the Nocturne Collective as we would any other independent organization. Ambassador Nakamura of Earth will serve as primary liaison, given humanity's familiarity with your kind. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected to be drawn directly into this. Kelnara's wings pulsed once, a gesture of finality. This session is concluded. Let it be recorded that on this day the Galactic Council chose evolution over entrenchment, growth over stagnation. We acknowledge our failures and commit to addressing them. And we acknowledge that power, true power, cannot be contained by law alone. It must be balanced by wisdom and moral courage. The assembly remained silent as Demon stepped down from the platform. For the first time in 3 days, he moved freely through the chamber, the guards making no move to stop him. But instead of leaving immediately, he approached Kelnara's position. The Arbiter watched him warily as he climbed the steps to her elevated platform. That took courage, Demon said quietly, speaking only loud enough for her to hear. To abstain when your entire career depends on appearing decisive. To admit the system is flawed rather than defending it blindly. Kelnara's wings shimmered with a complex pattern of colors. Don't mistake pragmatism for courage. I simply recognized that condemning you would accomplish nothing except making you a martyr and driving the collective underground. This way at least we maintain dialogue. Perhaps, Demon said with a slight smile. Or perhaps you actually believe justice matters more than order. Time will tell which it is. He descended the steps and walked toward the exit. As he passed through the chamber doors, half the assembly remained frozen in shock, while the other half erupted into heated arguments about what had just occurred. Sarah quickly moved to intercept him in the corridor outside. Wait, she called. We need to discuss my role as liaison. Demon stopped and turned, his crimson eyes studying her. You're afraid. Of course I'm afraid, Sarah admitted. I've just been assigned to work with someone who terrifies half the galaxy and inspires the other half to revolution. My government is going to have very strong opinions about this. Your government has known about my kind for centuries, Demon said calmly. Earth has its own vampires, though most of them prefer to remain hidden. I'm merely the first to operate openly on a galactic scale. That doesn't make my job any easier. Demon's expression softened slightly. I chose not to object to your appointment because I researched your record. You've spent your career advocating for better treatment of colony workers and pushing for stronger oversight of corporate exploitation. You actually believe in the principles you claim to uphold. And that matters to you? It's the only thing that matters, Demon said. I don't need a diplomat who will rubber stamp whatever the council decides. I need someone who will honestly tell me when I'm wrong and fight for reform when I'm right. Can you do that? Sarah met his ancient gaze without flinching. I can try. But you need to understand something. I agree that injustice exists in our civilization. I've seen it firsthand. But I also believe in working within systems to change them, not tearing them down. Then we'll make an interesting team, Demon said. I'll teach you when systems need to be torn down and you can teach me patience. Fair enough. Before Sarah could respond, a commotion erupted from the chamber behind them. Angry voices were growing louder, and she heard the distinctive sound of furniture being overturned. They rushed back to find the assembly in chaos. Counselor Zirl stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by a group of delegates who shared his outrage. This is surrender, Zirl shouted. We have just handed control of galactic civilization to a being who acknowledges no authority but his own. The Arbiter has betrayed everything this council stands for. Kelnara remained on her platform, wings spread defensively. The council has spoken. The decision is made. A decision that will destroy us, Zirl countered. He turned to address the entire assembly. Don't you see? We've just admitted that power matters more than law. That any being strong enough can simply ignore our authority. What happens when others follow his example? When every species with enhanced soldiers or biological weapons decides they can enforce their own version of justice. Several delegates voiced agreement. The chamber was dividing rapidly between those who supported the verdict and those who saw it as capitulation. Demon walked calmly back into the chaos, his presence causing immediate silence to spread like ripples in water. You're right to be afraid, Counselor, he said, his voice carrying effortlessly. I am setting a precedent. But not the one you think. He moved to stand in the center of the chamber, addressing everyone. I don't encourage beings to ignore authority simply because they can. I encourage them to question authority that enables injustice. There's a difference. A significant one. Semantics, Zirl spat. You dress tyranny in noble language. No, Demon said firmly. Tyranny is forcing beings into slavery through legal contracts. Tyranny is imprisoning those who speak truth to power. Tyranny is accepting suffering as the cost of stability. I have ended tyranny, not embraced it. He gestured around the chamber. Every one of you has the power to create real change within your own systems. You have resources, influence, authority. If you had used those things to address the injustices I've intervened in, I would never have needed to act. The question isn't whether I'm setting a dangerous precedent. The question is why you allowed those situations to exist in the first place. Counselor Mayara stepped forward, her feathers settling into a calmer pattern. He has a point, Zirl. I reviewed the cases during deliberation. In every instance, formal complaints had been filed with the council. In every instance, those complaints were dismissed or tabled indefinitely. We knew about these problems and chose to ignore them. Because we must prioritize, Zirl insisted. We cannot address every complaint from every system. We balance competing interests. We make difficult choices. You protect the powerful and abandon the weak, Demon corrected. You call it balance? I call it cowardice. Zirl's carapace flushed darker with rage. You dare. I dare, Demon interrupted, his voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. I dare to speak truth you find uncomfortable. I dare to act when you won't. And I dare to stand here and tell you that your civilization is failing, and beings like me are the consequence of that failure. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. Several delegates backed away from the confrontation, sensing the predator that lurked beneath Demon's civilized exterior. But Zirl held his ground. If you truly believe in justice rather than power, prove it. Submit to restrictions. Allow the council to oversee your actions. Accept accountability. I already have, Demon said. I've agreed to report injustices to the council before acting. I've agreed to diplomatic relations and monitoring. What I won't accept is being constrained while the injustices continue unchecked. The council must prove it's worthy of the authority it claims. He turned to address the full assembly. I propose a trial period. 1 standard year. I bring cases to your attention. You investigate and act. At the end of that year we evaluate honestly. If you've demonstrated that reform is possible, that the system can address injustice effectively, I'll continue working within it. If not, he let the implication hang in the air. And if you're not satisfied with our pace? Zero demanded. If we don't act exactly as you want? What then? Then I return to doing what I've been doing, Demon said simply. But at least we'll both know we tried. Kelnara's wings pulsed with sudden decisiveness. The council accepts this proposal. 1 year. We will establish the review committee immediately and prioritize the cases Demon brings forward. Councillor Mayara, you will chair the committee. Mayara's feathers ruffled in surprise, but she bowed in acceptance. I will do my best to ensure fair evaluation. That's all I ask, Demon said. The assembly gradually settled, though tension remained thick in the air. Zero and his supporters withdrew to their section, clearly unhappy but unable to challenge the arbiter's decision. As the session officially concluded, Sarah approached Demon again. That was either very brave or very reckless. Giving them a deadline to prove themselves. It's neither, Demon said. It's strategic. They needed a path forward that didn't feel like complete surrender. This gives them that while ensuring actual pressure for reform. And if they fail? Demon's crimson eyes met hers. Then the galaxy will see clearly that the council can't reform itself, and beings will have to choose between a broken system and something new. Either way, change is coming. The first test. 3 months into the trial period, Sarah found herself aboard a transport heading toward the industrial moon of Kavros Prime. Demon sat across from her in the passenger cabin, his presence drawing nervous glances from the other travelers despite his deliberately casual appearance. Tell me about this case again, Sarah said, reviewing the data on her tablet. Kavros Prime is a manufacturing hub for the Moran Collective, Demon explained. 3 million workers producing military-grade equipment and starship components. The facility has been operating for 40 years, and in that time, not a single worker has ever left employment voluntarily. Sarah frowned. That's unusual. But maybe they just have excellent benefits. They have mandatory neural implants that suppress the desire to leave, Demon said flatly. It's classified as a loyalty enhancement program, and is technically legal under Moran law because workers consent to the procedure when they're hired. That can't be informed consent if the implant affects their ability to question the arrangement. Exactly. I brought this to Councillor Mayara's committee 6 weeks ago. They've been investigating ever since, but so far nothing has changed. The Moran government insists everything is legal. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. This was exactly the kind of case that would test whether the council could actually reform. And you're bringing me along because? Because you're the official liaison. If I act without council approval, I violate our agreement. But if we investigate together and the council still fails to act, then we have clear evidence that the system isn't working. The transport docked at Kavros Prime's main station. As they disembarked, Sarah noticed the security presence was unusually heavy. Guards with stunner rifles watched every corridor, and surveillance drones hovered at regular intervals. They know we're coming, she muttered. Of course they do, Demon said. Mayara's committee filed formal notice of our inspection. Standard protocol. A tall Moran official approached them, his scaled hide gleaming under the station lights. I am Administrator Kref. You have authorization to tour the facility, but you will be accompanied at all times and may not interfere with production operations. Understood, Sarah said diplomatically, though she caught Demon's slight smile. He clearly had other plans. The tour was carefully orchestrated. They were shown clean, well-lit production floors where workers moved with synchronized efficiency. Break rooms with comfortable seating. Medical facilities with advanced equipment. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. The workers seemed very focused, Sarah observed as they watched a team assembling complex machinery. The neural implants enhance concentration, Kreth explained proudly. Accidents have decreased by 97% since the program was implemented. Productivity has increased by 40%. Everyone benefits. Can we speak with some workers? Demon asked casually. They're on a tight production schedule, Kreth said quickly. Perhaps during the next break period. Now would be better, Demon said, and something in his tone made it clear this wasn't really a request. Kreth's scales rippled with irritation, but he gestured to a nearby supervisor. 5 minutes. Select 3 workers for interview. They were led to a small conference room where 3 workers joined them. A human woman named Yuki, a Vrel male called Torvin, and a Korthan female named Shiera. All 3 wore identical uniforms and had small metallic ports visible behind their left ears where the neural implants interfaced. How long have you worked here? Sarah asked gently. 16 years, Yuki said with a pleasant smile. It's very fulfilling work. Have you ever considered leaving? Trying a different career? Yuki's smile never wavered. Why would I leave? This is exactly where I should be. Should be or want to be? Demon asked quietly. A flicker of confusion crossed Yuki's face. Those are the same thing, aren't they? Demon leaned forward, his crimson eyes fixed on hers. Yuki, I'm going to ask you something and I want you to really think about the answer. Not what the implant tells you to think. What you actually feel. If you could remove the implant right now, would you? Administrator Kreth stood abruptly. That's an inappropriate question. You're attempting to undermine the worker's satisfaction. I'm asking about informed consent, Demon said without looking away from Yuki. Answer the question. Yuki's expression struggled between the placid smile and something else. Her hands trembled slightly. The implant helps me. I need it. Without it, I might. Might what? Demon pressed gently. Might want to leave, she whispered, and the admission seemed to cause her physical pain. Her hand went to her temple and she winced. That's enough, Kreth snapped. This interview is over. But Demon was already moving. In a blur of motion too fast for most eyes to follow, he crossed to Yuki and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. May I help you? Yuki looked up at him and for just a moment, genuine fear and hope warred in her eyes. Please, she breathed. What happened next would be debated in council chambers for months afterward. Demon's hand moved to the neural port, and with impossible precision, he disabled the implant's control functions without causing injury. Similar actions followed with Torvin and Shiera before Kreth could even call for security. The 3 workers gasped as if surfacing from deep water. Confusion, then recognition, then horror flooded their expressions. What have I been doing? Yuki stammered. 16 years, oh stars, 16 years of my life. Security burst into the room, weapons drawn. Kreth pointed at Demon. Arrest him. He's committed assault and sabotage. But Sarah stepped between them and the vampire, her diplomatic credentials held high. Stand down. This is an official council investigation. These workers were being held in a state of mental imprisonment. Demon has freed them, as is within his rights under the Humanitarian Intervention Clause. There is no such clause, Kreth snarled. Actually, Demon said calmly, Ambassador Nakamura is referring to a clause we've proposed to the Council Review Committee. It's not officially adopted yet, but given the circumstances, I believe immediate action was warranted. Sarah shot him a look. He hadn't mentioned anything about a proposed clause. He was improvising, forcing the council to either support his actions or explicitly condone the neural imprisonment. Brilliant and infuriating. We're leaving, Sarah announced. These 3 workers are coming with us, and they will provide testimony to the council. Administrator Kreth, you and your facility will face formal charges of illegal imprisonment and violation of sapient rights. The Moran government will never accept. The Moran government doesn't have a choice, Demon interrupted. You have 2 options. Submit to council investigation willingly, or I return here tonight and free every single worker by force. Your choice. The journey back to council space was tense. Yuki, Torvin, and Shiera were slowly coming to terms with what had been done to them. Sarah worked with counselors via comlink to provide immediate psychological support. Demon stood at the viewport watching the stars. You used me, Sarah said quietly as she joined him. You knew this would happen. You wanted to create a crisis that would force the council to act. Yes, Demon admitted without shame. And it worked. Mayara's committee has been investigating for 6 weeks with no results. Now we have witnesses, evidence of active harm, and a situation that demands immediate response. The council will have to act. And if they don't? Demon's reflection in the viewport showed his ancient eyes glowing like embers. Then tonight, 3 million workers go free, and the council's failure becomes undeniable. Back at council headquarters, the emergency session was already underway. Kelnara looked exhausted as she called the chamber to order. The situation at Kavros Prime has escalated, she announced. Demon Corvus has taken unilateral action during an authorized investigation. The Moran government is demanding his immediate arrest and the return of the workers he freed. Zero rose triumphantly. This is exactly what I warned about. He cannot control himself. He agreed to work within our system, and at the first opportunity he violated that agreement. I saved 3 lives, Demon said from his position at the witness stand. 3 beings who were being held in mental slavery. If your system requires me to leave them imprisoned while you debate legalities, then your system is broken beyond repair. Counselor Mayara stood, her feathers arranged in a pattern of deep thought. I must report that our investigation into Kavros Prime revealed disturbing facts. The neural implant program was indeed approved under Moran law, but the law itself was written by the facility's corporate owners and passed through their government with minimal oversight. It's legal but only because the powerful made it legal. Then change the law, Demon said simply. Right now. Make neural imprisonment illegal across all council space. Set the precedent that mental freedom is a fundamental right that no government can violate. We can't simply rewrite laws on demand, Zero protested. There are processes, debates, impact studies. How long? Demon interrupted. How long would that process take? Mayara hesitated. Realistically? 2 to 3 years for a law of that scope. And how many beings remain imprisoned at Kavros Prime right now? Approximately 3 million, Mayara admitted quietly. Demon turned to face the full assembly. 3 million beings held in mental chains. And you want them to wait 3 years while you debate? While you study the impact? This is why I act. Because your processes protect the status quo, not the victims. Kelnara's wings trembled. What would you have us do? Emergency decree, Demon said. You have that authority, Arbiter. Declare neural imprisonment a violation of fundamental rights. Give the Moran government 30 days to comply or face sanctions. Free those workers now, not in 3 years. That would set a dangerous precedent, Zero argued. Allowing emergency decrees based on one being's moral outrage. It would set a precedent that beings matter more than bureaucracy, Demon countered. That when we discover profound injustice, we act immediately rather than hiding behind process. The chamber fell silent. Every delegate understood that this was the real test of their agreement with Demon. If they acted decisively, they proved the system could work. If they delayed and debated, they proved him right about its failures. Kelnara closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, they burned with a determination Sarah had never seen before. I invoke Article 17 of the Council Charter, the Arbiter declared. Emergency authority in cases of humanitarian crisis. As of this moment, neural imprisonment and all similar technologies that suppress free will are declared illegal throughout Council space. Any facility employing such technology has 90 days to deactivate the systems and provide full medical support to affected workers. The chamber erupted. Half the delegates leaped to their feet in protest. The other half showed varying degrees of shock and support. This is madness, Zero shouted. You're letting him control our decisions. No, Kelnara said firmly. I'm making the decision we should have made decades ago when this technology first appeared. Demon simply forced us to confront what we've been avoiding. She turned to Demon. You win this round. But understand that every time you push us like this, you make it harder for those of us who believe reform is possible. Some will see this as proof that negotiation is weakness. Some will always prefer comfortable injustice to uncomfortable change, Demon replied. But you did the right thing, Arbiter. That matters more than political convenience. As the session dissolved into chaotic debates, Sarah pulled Demon aside. You manipulated that entire situation. I exposed that situation, Demon corrected. The manipulation was what the Moran Collective had been doing to its workers for 40 years. I just made it impossible to ignore. And the 3 million workers? What happens to them now? The Nocturne Collective has volunteer counselors ready to help with the transition, Demon said. We've dealt with similar cases before, though never on this scale. It will take time, resources, and patience. But they'll be free. Actually free. Sarah shook her head, not sure whether to admire or fear this being. You're changing the galaxy one crisis at a time. Better than changing nothing, Demon said. Come on. We have work to do. 3 million people are about to wake up from a nightmare, and they'll need all the help they can get. As they left the chamber, Sarah realized that Demon had been right about one thing. The system could work, but only when forced to confront its failures directly. The question was whether the council would learn from this or simply resent being pushed. The next 9 months would provide the answer. The resistance. 6 months into the trial period, the galaxy was changing in ways both profound and troubling. The emergency decree regarding neural imprisonment had freed millions of workers across 17 systems. But change always breeds resistance, and that resistance was growing organized. Sarah arrived at Demon's current residence, a modest dwelling on a neutral trading station, to find him reviewing reports on multiple holographic displays. His expression was darker than usual. "What's wrong?" she asked. "3 incidents in the past week," Demon said, gesturing to the displays. Former workers who accepted freedom, then mysteriously disappeared. 2 were found dead, apparent suicides. The 3rd left behind a message saying she couldn't handle life without the implant and was returning to Kavros Prime. Psychological trauma from the imprisonment? That's what they want us to think, Demon said grimly. But I examined the bodies of the 2 who died. There were traces of compounds that induced depression and suicidal ideation. They were murdered, made to look like they couldn't handle freedom. Sarah felt cold dread settle in her stomach. Someone's trying to discredit the reforms. Not just discredit them, Demon said. They're building a narrative that the implants were actually beneficial, that freed workers can't function without them. It's sophisticated propaganda backed by murder. He pulled up another display showing financial transactions. I've tracked the funding back through 6 shell corporations. It leads to a coalition of industrial interests who've lost billions since the decree. They're calling themselves the Prosperity Alliance. Ironic name for people profiting from slavery. They prefer efficient labor management, Demon said with bitter humor. They've been lobbying the council hard, arguing that the emergency decree was rash and economically devastating. Some delegates are starting to listen. As if summoning them through mention alone, Sarah's communication device chimed with an urgent summons from Councillor Mayara. They were needed at council headquarters immediately. The emergency session was already tense when they arrived. Zero stood at the central platform, presenting data that painted a grim picture. Since the neural imprisonment decree, 17 systems have experienced economic disruption, he announced. Production has fallen by an average of 32%. Labor costs have increased by 45%. And tragically, over 200 freed workers have committed suicide or attempted to return to their previous state. He turned to face Kelnara. I take no pleasure in saying this, Arbiter, but I warned that hasty action would have consequences. We are seeing those consequences now. The cure may be worse than the disease. Councillor Mayara stood, her feathers arranged in patterns of frustration. Those statistics lack context. Production has fallen because companies refuse to implement proper worker protections and fair wages. They're deliberately creating chaos to prove their point. Or perhaps, Zero countered, some systems genuinely require methods we find distasteful to function efficiently. Not everything can be solved by imposing our moral preferences. Slavery by any other name is still slavery, Demon said from his observation position. Ah yes, the architect of this disaster, Zero said with thinly veiled contempt. Tell me, Demon Corvus, do you feel responsible for the 200 deaths? Demon's crimson eyes flashed dangerously. I feel responsible for not acting sooner. As for the deaths, I have evidence that at least some were murders staged to look like suicides. Someone is systematically eliminating freed workers to create exactly the narrative you're presenting. He transmitted data to the central display. Financial trails, chemical analysis, witness reports. The Prosperity Alliance is funding a campaign of terrorism to roll back the reforms. The evidence was damning, but Zero was prepared. Conspiracy theories from a being who admits he operates outside our laws. How convenient that anyone who opposes his crusade becomes part of a sinister plot. Check the evidence yourself, Demon said coldly. Unless you're too invested in the narrative to care about truth. Enough, Kelnara intervened. Councillor Mayara, assign investigators to examine Demon's claims. If there's merit to them, we'll act accordingly. In the meantime, we must address the economic disruption. By which you mean consider rolling back the decree, Demon said flatly. The Arbiter's wings drooped slightly. The Council is under immense pressure. If we can't demonstrate that the reforms are sustainable, we'll lose the political will to maintain them. Then demonstrate it, Demon said. He stepped onto the main platform, addressing the full assembly. The economic disruption is artificial. These companies are choosing to let production collapse rather than adapt to fair labor practices. They're gambling that you'll cave to pressure rather than call their bluff. He pulled up his own data. I've been working with the freed workers, helping them organize legitimate labor cooperatives. Within 3 months, I can have alternative operations running that will restore production while maintaining worker freedom and dignity. But only if the council holds firm. 3 months of continued economic chaos, Zero said. 3 months of more deaths. How many lives is your ideology worth? All of them, Demon said simply. Every single being deserves freedom, and I'll spend centuries establishing that principle if necessary. The question is whether this council has the courage to stand with me or whether you'll surrender at the first sign of resistance. The debate raged for hours. But ultimately, a compromise was reached. The neural imprisonment decree would remain in effect, but the council would provide economic support to affected systems to ease the transition. Investigations would be opened into the suspicious deaths. And Demon would have his 3 months to prove that free labor could be sustainable. As the session ended, Sarah caught up with Demon in the corridor. That was closer than I'd like. We almost lost everything. We didn't almost lose, Demon said. This was always going to happen. Every reform faces backlash from those who benefit from the status quo. What matters is that we didn't break. Yet, Sarah added, the next 3 months are critical. Then we make them count. Over the following weeks, Demon worked tirelessly with freed workers across multiple systems. He used his resources and the growing network of the Nocturne Collective to establish worker cooperatives, training programs and mental health support systems. Sarah accompanied him to Kavros Prime, where the transformation was remarkable. The same facilities that had housed imprisoned workers now operated as cooperative enterprises. The workers elected their own leadership, set their own hours and received fair compensation. Production had initially plummeted, but it was rapidly recovering as workers gained confidence and skills. More importantly, innovation had exploded. Free to think and create, the workers were developing improvements to processes that had remained stagnant for decades. It turns out, a freed human worker named Marcus told Sarah during a tour, that people work better when they're treated like people. Who knew? But not everyone was celebrating. On their last night at Kavros Prime, the facility came under attack. Demon sensed them first, his vampire instincts detecting the approach of dozens of armed individuals. We have company, he said quietly, already moving toward the facility's entrance. The attackers wore no identifying marks, but their equipment was military grade. They stormed the facility with lethal efficiency, firing on workers and attempting to plant explosive charges. Demon moved like a shadow given deadly purpose. He disarmed attackers before they could fire, disabled others with precise strikes that left them unconscious but alive. His speed was impossible to follow with normal eyes, his strength sufficient to tear through armor plating. Sarah coordinated the evacuation of non-combatant workers while several members of the Nocturne Collective who served as facility security engaged the attackers. The collective members fought with coordinated precision, their enhanced abilities allowing them to protect civilians while minimizing casualties. Within 15 minutes, the attack was over. 18 attackers had been captured alive. 0 facility workers had been killed, though several were injured. Demon stood among the unconscious attackers, not even breathing hard. But his expression was grim. This was professional. Well-funded. They weren't here to scare us. They wanted a massacre. Interrogation of the attackers revealed what they already suspected. The Prosperity Alliance had hired mercenaries to stage a devastating attack that could be blamed on worker unrest and instability. The plan had been to kill hundreds, destroying both the cooperative and public support for the reforms. The evidence was presented to the council the next day. Even Zero looked shaken by the brutality of what had been planned. The Prosperity Alliance must be held accountable, Mayara declared. This was attempted mass murder in service of corporate profits. But once again the situation proved more complex than hoped. The Prosperity Alliance had members in the governments of 8 different systems. Bringing charges against them meant accusing sitting officials of conspiracy to commit terrorism. It will cause a political crisis, Kelnara said wearily. Half the council will see it as overreach. Then let there be a crisis, Demon said. These beings tried to murder hundreds of innocent workers. If that doesn't warrant action, what does? Kelnara looked at him for a long moment, and Sarah saw something in the Arbiter's expression she hadn't seen before. Respect, perhaps. Or recognition of a kindred spirit. You're right, Kelnara said finally. Mayara, prepare formal charges against all Prosperity Alliance members identified in the conspiracy. We'll present them next session. That could cost you your position, Zero warned. The political fallout will be worth it, Kelnara interrupted. I've spent 300 years maintaining stability and compromising with power. Demon has spent less than a year forcing us to confront our failures. Perhaps it's time I learned from his example. The charges were filed, and the resulting political earthquake shook the council to its foundations. 8 governments recalled their delegates in protest. 4 major trade alliances threatened sanctions. The entire structure of galactic governance seemed on the verge of collapse. But something unexpected happened. Smaller systems, those without powerful industrial bases or military might, began to speak up. Representatives from colonies and mining operations, from agricultural worlds and research stations, started demanding their voices be heard. They had been silent for so long, accepting the decisions of the powerful because they lacked alternatives. But Demon's actions had shown that alternatives existed. That the weak could become strong, that the oppressed could become free. A movement was forming, and it terrified the established order. The breaking point. 9 months into the trial period, the galaxy stood at a crossroads. The council was divided more deeply than at any time in its history. Reform advocates, inspired by Demon's successes, pushed for sweeping changes to labor law, corporate oversight, and governmental accountability. Traditionalists fought desperately to maintain the systems that had enriched and empowered them for centuries. And in the shadows, something darker was stirring. Sarah was reviewing reports in her office when the alert came through. A Nocturne collective safehouse on the mining colony of Helios 7 had been destroyed. 43 members killed, including 17 who had been providing counseling services to recently freed workers. She immediately contacted Demon, but his communication device was offline. That was unusual. He always maintained contact with his network. Panic rising, she reached out to other collective members. None had heard from him in 6 hours. He had gone to investigate reports of illegal imprisonment on a corporate research station and hadn't reported back. Sarah made an executive decision. She contacted Counselor Mayara and requested emergency transport to Demon's last known location. They found him in what remained of the research station. The facility had been gutted by fire, bodies of both researchers and security forces scattered throughout. And in the central laboratory they found Demon. He was alive but barely. Something had wounded him severely, his vampire healing struggling to cope with injuries that should have been impossible to inflict. Beside him lay the body of a being Sarah didn't recognize, humanoid but with features that seemed wrong, too perfect and too horrible at once. Medical team, Mayara ordered urgently. Now. As they stabilized Demon for transport, Sarah examined the dead being. Its blood was silver, and its body was already decomposing at an accelerated rate, as if it couldn't maintain cohesion now that life had left it. Back at Council headquarters, Demon regained consciousness in the medical bay. His first words were, "They're using bioweapons against us." "Who?" Sarah demanded. "What attacked you?" "Something engineered," Demon said, his voice strained. "The research station was developing anti-vampire countermeasures. Genetically modified hunters designed to kill beings like me. They didn't expect me to win, but I'm older and stronger than they anticipated." He tried to sit up but winced in pain. "But they have more. Dozens, maybe hundreds. The Prosperity Alliance has been funding this research for months. They're not just resisting reform. They're preparing for war." Counselor Mayara, who had rushed to the medical bay, looked horrified. "Bioweapons are illegal under 17 different treaties." "So was neural imprisonment," Demon said bitterly. "Your treaties only matter to those who choose to follow them." The attack on the safehouse and Demon's near-death experience had immediate consequences. Members of the Nocturne collective across the galaxy went to ground, disappearing into hiding. The reform movement that had been building momentum suddenly found itself leaderless and afraid. The Prosperity Alliance saw their opening. To be continued.